Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Martin. I'm a teacher in Miami-Dade County. Um, I'm a building steward, but I think at this moment, most importantly, I am a person living through COVID-19. With all the stressors that come along with that, what I found comforting was arming myself with as much information as possible about my school district's response to COVID-19, um, their actions, and even discussing their inactions in regard to it. And having that information, I felt offered a level of comfort that I didn't have before. And I thought, why not share that information with other teachers in Miami-Dade County, that maybe I could provide some knowledge to you, and that you guys could maybe provide knowledge to me for things that I'm unfamiliar with. And this platform can be a space for us to share information and be able to help each other through this crisis. So let me share with you guys what I've come up with. And I'm going to call it the COVID-19 Educator Guide. Um, and I guess I'm calling that because this is my way of trying to guide myself through this crisis. So the first thing I think I want to talk about is COVID-19 notification, quarantining procedures, and compensation. So when it comes to COVID-19 notification, I think one of the first things I realized is when a student or a faculty member uh, notifies the school system that they're COVID-19 positive, more specifically the school site, the first thing that happens is a notification of um, the region personnel and the district personnel. That's one of the first things administration does. It's not contact tracing. It's not notifying secondary exposures. It's notifying the region and the district. I personally don't know how I feel about that, but that is the process. Then after which, shortly thereafter, I'm sure there's contact tracing that goes on with that person as to who they've been in contact with, who's going to be a secondary exposure. And then subsequently the notification of all secondary exposures, which should be a face-to-face situation. I'm hearing at some work sites or some situations that it's automated. That's the first time they've been notified. But if you're a secondary exposure, your first notification should be directly with your principal, whether face-to-face through Zoom or a call. The other information connected to notification is that the grade book should reflect under quarantine. And I think this is a really important detail that has been added and recently in a weekly briefing, that if a student is being quarantined because they're a primary or secondary exposure, in the attendance portion, it should say that that student is under a special note. And in the comments portion, it should mention that that student is under quarantine. And it should say that for every single day that that person is quarantined for 14 days for that student. It should definitely state every single day they're under special note and that person is under quarantine. So I would encourage you guys to look into your gradebook and look for that, because it's helpful in you understanding whether or not you have COVID-19 exposure within your classroom, whether through a secondary exposure or a tertiary exposure. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. After which there's sanitation of the areas of high exposure. At my work site, I kind of ask more questions as to what that looks like. And I'm hearing it's the classrooms that those students were in, it's the hallways, it's the bathrooms in that area, and sometimes it might be the cafeteria, that as much as possible, it's being sanitized. Then there's an automated message that most of us get, the doomed automated message, right? That goes out to the general parents, the general faculty, the general staff, and students. And that's just notification that an individual is COVID-19 positive, that what procedures the work site did, and a general notification of that reality. The dashboard is updated after pretty much everything happens that I just mentioned, after all of that, and then after the Florida Department of Health, confirms the case. Once that happens, then the dashboard is updated I can only speak for my specific work site. We were notified, I would say almost a week ago, of 2 COVID-19 cases at our work site. Excuse me, 2 COVID-19 cases at our work site. And when I checked a day or so ago, um, it was still reflecting at 0 COVID-19 cases at our work site. So I would say that the dashboard is the least reliable source of information, and you should probably treat it as such. I've tried to advocate at my work site for notification to occur of the faculty, like that an email is sent out telling the teachers specifically, the faculty specifically, how many COVID cases do we have? How many quarantine individuals do we have? Is it how many students, how many staff? And that's something that as the designated student at my work site, I've advocated for. So I definitely encourage you to personally ask your administrator to send out those information to you guys through email, just so you have it, or talk to your building steward about advocating for it. Let's talk about exposure types. I've realized that there's 3 types of exposure types. I wasn't always aware of that. I was aware of the primary exposure, which it's the person who has a confirmed case of COVID-19, and this person, of course, must be quarantined. And then you have your secondary exposures. Those are people who were in sustained contact with someone with COVID-19, classroom teachers who were teaching a student who was COVID-19 positive for 90 minutes or however long at your work site. You would be a secondary exposure, or other students in that classroom as well. Or if there's an athletic situation going on, the athletes involved would also be considered secondary exposures. But something new to me is the tertiary exposures. So tertiary exposures is individuals who were in contact with someone who had sustained contact with a COVID-19 positive person. And those people can quarantine if they want, but according to the school system, according to Miami-Dade County Public Schools, they're not really required to quarantine, and therefore you would probably have to use your own days if you wanted to quarantine as a tertiary exposure. So case in point, if you have a student who's quarantining because they were in a classroom with someone who was COVID-19 positive, but it's not the person who was in your classroom, then you're a tertiary exposure. You were in contact with someone who was in contact with someone who had COVID-19. So for primary, secondary, now we even encourage for tertiary exposures. There should be a consistent monitoring of your health for 14 days. You should check your temperature, check if you're feeling any symptoms connected to COVID-19. You should definitely test yourself for COVID-19 and maybe retest before returning back to work to verify that you're not COVID-19 positive. So those are just some suggestions and explanation of the 3 different types of exposure types that we have in our school districts. When it comes to exposure types, when it comes to primary exposure and secondary exposure, both of these types are required to quarantine. They must quarantine, but they can work. If you are asymptomatic, you can work. But according to our contract, according to our LOU, or letter of understanding with Miami-Dade County Public Schools and United Teachers Today, you would have to fill out a leave card every single day that you're out for the 14 days. And you would check off temporary duty. And in the comment section, you would write working remotely due to workplace exposure. And I would encourage people to do that, because I've been hearing at different work sites and different situations that maybe administration saying, don't worry about it, just get on and work. You don't have to fill out anything. You don't have to do anything. I'll take care of it. I encourage all teachers, individuals, clerical, to, fill out your leave card and have that written documentation that you were working and that you were working from home, right? But if you cannot work, you become symptomatic, and it doesn't mean that you have to start taking your sick days, you can actually be provided compensation through an alternative means. And that's called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And this will provide you an opportunity to work, to not work, and not have to exhaust your sick days in order to do so. So your administrator is required to provide you the application, and he or she is also required to offer assistance in you filling it out. So please keep those two pieces of information in mind as well. All right. So let's say that your child has to quarantine. Your work site, you're very fortunate you haven't had to quarantine yourself, but your child is in a situation where he or she has to quarantine. In those circumstances, you can use the same concept, the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It contains important paid sick days and paid leave provisions for you. And it's good for educators, it's good for other people who are in different fields as well, who might have children who have to quarantine or they have to quarantine themselves. It's with up to, it pays up to 80 hours, which is approximately 10 days, two work weeks of paid sick time to address illness and caregiving needs associated with the coronavirus. So this applies if your child's school has to close, and you're unable to telework, regardless of how long you've been an employee. It doesn't matter if this is your third day in the system, you're allowed to use the FFCRA. The employee will be provided the application, given assistance in acquiring benefits. That's in our letter of understanding on page 2. Another question that I found interesting and I wanted an answer to is, how much do I get paid when I take emergency paid sick time? The rate of pay for sick time depends on the reason for which it is taken. If you're taking paid sick time to care for yourself, you'll be paid your regular rate of pay up to $511 per day. If you're taking sick time to care for someone else, you will be paid at 2/3 of your regular rate of pay, up to $200 per day. Some other things to know is your employer cannot require you to look for or find a replacement to cover the hours you are in emergency paid sick time. So the only obligation you have in using the Families First Coronavirus Act, the only requirement you have is, of course, your emergency lesson plans or providing a lesson plan for the student. But you're not required to provide substitute coverage or to deal with any issues within your classroom. That's the responsibility of the employer, not the employee who's out on a leave. If you are enrolled in health coverage through your employer must continue your coverage during your emergency leave. So you're still allowed to have your insurance regardless of you being on this emergency leave. Emergency paid leave, both paid sick days and paid family leave, are available until December 31st. I'm hearing good conversation that this might be extended, but as of right now, it's good until December 31st. So those are like the major highlights of what I am focusing on for today. I hope this was helpful. I hope that this benefited you guys in some substantial way. If you have more information connected to this particular topic of notification, of compensation, of quarantining in connection to COVID-19, I encourage you to put something in the comment section to add your information, because we're all in this together. The next time that I come back, I would like to talk about what happens when you're not eligible for ADA. You applied for disability and you were denied. Is that it for you? Do you have to just go back into the physical building? Do you have to take a leave of absence? Do you have to resign from the district? Now what? What's next when you receive that? So that's going to be the next segment's conversation. And I hope that you found today's segment interesting and definitely beneficial. If you did, I hope that you would like the page. I hope that you would share it with others as much as possible so this information gets out there because we are our own um, support system through this. So I thank you once again. My name's Alexandria, and I appreciate you checking this out. Take care.